The last thing I'll ever want to do in a video game is enter combat. Even in games with wonderful combat systems like Ghost of Tsushima, the Arkham series, or Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, I always look to take the stealthy approach first, to embody these legendary figures in the arena they excel most in. So now that the time has come to design the game system for my indie game Outlaw's Vengeance, I wanted to make sure that I didn't do it begrudgingly, that I do it justice even if the intended playstyle and format of the game is not combat but rather stealth and parkour. The journey to accomplish that began like any other does, with understanding who you're playing as in this game, knowing that would influence the decisions we make in terms of combat design. So when we looked at our game and tried to unravel this combat puzzle, there were three questions that we asked ourselves. Who is Silas Ridge? How does fighting in this world feel? And when is it time to die? So let's begin with the man himself, Silas. Silas Ridge was trained as an Octari, which means he's more used to stealthing around and killing dudes from the back than entering combat. And if he does enter combat, Silas is also an expert duelist, meaning he should be incredibly capable of quickly cutting down one or two enemies in a fight and returning to stealth. But Silas is an assassin. He's not supposed to be. Any assassin character, in my opinion, should feel like a glass cannon, capable of delivering massive amounts of damage, but also clearly more powerful in the shadows. He needs to feel human in combat, inhuman or superhuman in stealth. We have to understand that the core focus of this game, the identity of this game when it comes to the player character, is one who is lethal, yet at the same time fragile. At this early stage in the development of combat, we are faced with a fork in the road. We have to decide whether to adopt a paired animation system, something you see in early Assassin's Creed games for example, or a hitbox-based system, which is more common in RPGs and almost all modern games. Hitbox-based combat relies on invisible collision volumes. These are hitboxes for attacks and hurtboxes for characters, to determine when and where an attack connects. The system basically allows for real-time physics-driven interactions where timing, positioning, and player skill play a critical role. It's common in games with fast-paced and more technical combat, such as Dark Souls or Devil May Cry for example, where the player maintains full control throughout the attack. Because hits are determined by spatial overlap during specific animation frames, this approach allows for more dynamic scenarios like striking multiple enemies at once or whiffing entirely if mistimed. In contrast, paired animation combat uses synchronized, pre-scripted sequences triggered when an attack lands under certain conditions. Both the attacker and the defender are locked into a shared animation, often resulting in cinematic and visually striking moments. This style was kind of typical in the older Assassin's Creed games or stealth takedowns in games like The Last of Us, where the focus is on immersion and spectacle rather than raw mechanical precision. However, it limits the player control and can feel repetitive or less reactive in gameplay, especially when overused or when variety in enemy behavior is lacking. So for this decision, again, it's important to transmit Silas's personality and character through the combat. To this end, I actually think it's more feasible to do a hitbox system even if it's slightly less flashy. First of all, it's less workload on the animators. We are after all a tiny team trying to do a lot, and the animation workload to make a combat system that functions solely on paired animation would be shooting ourselves in the foot. Also, not only is it easier and more feasible, but hitbox-based systems allow for a bigger feeling of strategy, control, and immersion. Since you're the one who has to manually determine spacing with the enemy to strike and evade at proper times, this approach also falls in line with our development philosophy and approach of making you the architect of Silas's triumphs and failures as an assassin. It makes you be the one who is strategizing how to overcome a combat scenario instead of just basically playing a movie that's button initiated. The biggest north star for our combat system will be to make an indie version of Ghost of Tsushima's combat. The feeling of being a master with the blade is nailed in that game, in my opinion. I think it's an amazing combat system. I love the clean animations that characterize Jin perfectly, and how quickly enemies fall to his blade, which is something that I'll expand on later because they feel human, like the blood he spills actually matters. So that's how we plan to communicate who Silas is. A master duelist who prefers to stay in the shadows, who can quickly dispatch a couple of guards when detected, but will suffer when guards increase in numbers. Silas can dodge, roll, parry, and strike. His strikes will lead enemies to a weakened state in which a cool execution animation will play. And that's the only time we're going to use paired animations, during the execution animation, because there it is more about the cinematic feel and like the immersion, and it serves as a reward that plays after you've done the hard work or the active work of doing the combat yourself. However, once a lot of enemies come, you're kind of fucked. This is where you're better off running away and going to the rooftops to avoid dying. To this end, we've also given Silas the ability to quick throw a smoke bomb in combat, so that you can have time to run away before they enter the chase sequence or a search sequence. So to recap, we've made two core decisions so far. We've chosen a hitbox-based combat system to make it more feasible for our team and give the player a sense of agency over their fate. how they position when they attack, that all feeds into the feeling that you are Silas. When he does something cool, it's because of you. And the second core decision is to make Silas very lethal but very fragile in combat, so he's much more favoring of stealth or 1 or 2 person duels. Now we have to answer our second question: how does fighting in this world feel? I've always loved fictional universes where melee combat exists and is the primary form of combat. That's why we have swords in a Wild West themed game instead of leaning into the idea of gun duels, which will exist and you do have a gun and enemies do have guns, but most of the combat you'll do will be actually sword combat. Since this is set in a dystopian setting, our cities are much more claustrophobic and vertical than the actual Wild West, meaning sometimes a sword is a better option in closed spaces rather than a revolver. From an assassin fantasy point of view, it's also just cooler to be wielding a knife as well as a gun. The biggest inspiration for how we want combat to feel is Dune. The newer movies are one of the core inspirations for this game. Like, I swear I have an addiction to the Dune movies, and it's inspired so much of this project from a mythos and ethos point of view. It actually bleeds specifically into the lore, which if you're interested to read, you can join our newsletter and I will send you entries every single week. I think the Denis Villeneuve movies capture that feeling of a tense and gritty knife fight while still keeping the cinematic feel. Paul Atreides fights phenomenally, but he's clearly stronger in duels than in open warfare. The main melee weapon characters used in our game is the Karsin, this bad boy right here. I didn't want them to be as long as a sword nor as short as a dagger. They're like short swords or half swords that maintain the sword combat style while feeling more quick and dirty. Like any duel you have walks a fine line between a back alley skirmish and a cinematic confrontation. Silas, on the other hand, wields a gear blade. This is a weapon that is exclusively used by Noctari. It's usually in dagger form, the one that you use in stealth kills, but when you enter combat it has the ability to extend into a short sword. It helps create distance between him and the enemies during melee combat and maintain kind of like a feeling of safety and spacing. So the animations we chose kept that idea in mind, that the swings and blocks have to feel quick and shady, like either party could slip the blade into the other's neck in a moment's notice. No huge swings or heavy arcs for the most part, but rather quick slashes and clever foot placement. We started off decently, though with some clear camera positioning issues that made it feel a bit too claustrophobic. It didn't really help the player space himself and honestly just didn't look that good. There were also huge input lags that felt a little unfair, some issues with locking and unlocking from enemies, and overall just not the quality we aspire for this game. And a lot of these things you won't be able to tell from the B-roll, but there's a lot of game feel aspects of this development process that we are trying to tweak to make sure that the game feels responsive and not too laggy, even if we're using motion matching as the core of our animation pipeline. And that's where Ghost of Tsushima came in to help. Even though we're trying to keep the feel, the aesthetic, the style of Dune, Ghost of Tsushima was very instrumental in making our combat system look and feel good for the context of a video game. The way that game uses camera logic and placement to make everything look and feel more cinematic, in my opinion, is just perfect. And with a simple change of lowering the camera when locking onto an enemy, it already looked much better and felt much better. Once enemies became more than one, the camera zooms out to let the player see everything that is happening around them and not feel overwhelming. We also finally added these epic execution animations that, in my opinion, just fit that style of Dune-inspired combat with assassin-style flair perfectly. This combat is something that we obviously still have to tweak, so feel free to share your thoughts below on how we could improve it while keeping in line with the Ghost of Tsushima and Dune North Stars. An important thing for this game is to make sure that the scope and the vision is focused, so that we don't get too distracted and we're always trying to answer the same question. Who is Silas? What is this world? And how do they interact? And that kind of leads us to the other side of combat, one that's a bit more controversial: gun combat. This is not really a third-person shooter, it's a stealth game. Combat is fun, but not the optimal way to play, nor where Silas is strongest. So when enemies start shooting at you, of course you can shoot back, but it's probably best to just run away and hide. Silas has a silenced revolver, which is a totally scientific and historically accurate thing that makes 100% sense. But the silenced revolver is more of a stealth tool than a combat weapon. You can use it to headshot enemies, and every enemy will always die from one headshot. You can also use it to burst pipes, tear through hanging crates, and like any other stealth tool, you have to use it mindfully. Stealth games that offer such powerful long-distance tools need to make sure not to give too many of those resources away for free, or else the risk of sneaking up behind a guard is completely gone if you can just camp in a corner and take everyone down, which means that your bullets are going to be scarce. It's going to be a resource that you have to manage. So what we're doing is taking the Hitman horror survival approach. Silas won't have many bullets, and you'll have to find them along the map to refill ammo. We don't have this yet, but we also want to add reload time to make sure that if you're in the middle of a gunfight, you're constantly thinking, I'm an assassin, I should probably be running away, or I have to be incredibly accurate with my revolver to not waste too many bullets. Because if you do enter a gunfight, you can hold your own, but it's going to mean the quick depletion of a very, very valuable resource. We're still tweaking enemy AI and gun combat to make it feel better, but as you can see, it's a pretty stressful situation to be shot at in this game. So the gun is more of a long-range stealth tool that you can use to kill or distract enemies, and it can also be used in combat. But it's probably not a smart idea to enter full RDR2 gunfight mode in the middle of an encounter. And we have the gear blade that allows Silas to enter cool melee duels with other steampunk cowboys. But now we have to answer the question, when is it time for Silas or his enemies to die? What a lot of games do to expand playtime is to add health bars that take ages to deplete, and to create a need for progression, create a feeling for the player to need to get or buy better weapons through either in-game currencies or microtransactions, and for the most part it's more of like a gamified system that just expands and pads the experience. There are games that do it extremely well, and there are games that do it really badly, but we're going to try and do things a little bit differently.
So what is the most controversial thing we're going to do in combat?
We're going to make it not fun to play.
Wow, that's a big marketing.
Yes, wishlist the game. This is going to be pretty controversial because it's going to put some people off, and it has to be okay to put people off, because I think that especially with an indie game trying to keep the scope reasonable, you have to know what the game is, and more importantly what the game isn't. So if you're someone who's looking for incredibly deep and difficult combat with huge boss fights that have multiple phases, level locked, level scaling, huge health bars, damage spongy, huge numbers flying in the screen, this is not going to be the game for you, and we're okay with that, and I hope that you watching respect that as well, because we're trying to deliver a very focused player fantasy. In this game, you play as an assassin. We're trying to deliver the assassin fantasy. Silas is an Octari, which means he's spectacularly talented when it comes to stealth, and he's incredibly talented when it comes to combat as well, but only in smaller skirmishes, in a duel or in a fight against 2 or 3 guards. The second you get to 3, 4, 5 guards, it's extremely likely that you're going to die. The most kind of optimal thing that you can do is run away. When is it time to die? It's kind of an illusion as to what we want to do with enemy health. A lot of people find it really rewarding to have enemies that take ages to kill, and you have to exercise a lot of patience and skill and timing to cut these enemies down. But I've always felt like that took away from the immersive factor of a video game. Have you ever watched me play Assassin's Creed Odyssey?
Unfortunately.
Do you remember how long it took to kill these fucking guards?
Like a headshot, 5 headshots, wouldn't even do it.
Why in the world would a human being, I'm not talking about a cyclops or a monster, because this is another thing. There's no monsters in this game, there's no like huge beasts, so that it makes sense in that case when it's a fantastical game that an enemy that you're hitting with a sword but it's a cyclops takes ages to kill. But as I keep saying in these videos, all of these enemies are human. So if you cut a human with a sword and slash them 3 times or impale them, why on earth would they not die?
Yeah, I remember there's a specific scene, I think it was Odyssey, where you were jumping on top of a guard and stabbing them, and even though you had cut them, they didn't die.
Yeah, I would jump, stab a man through the fucking neck, and then he would just lose half his health and just look at you like, what the fuck did you do?
And it's so anticlimactic.
It's incredibly anticlimactic. And again, some people really like that because it's an RPG. You have to grind and kind of earn the ability to auto kill or insta kill these people. But I don't think it serves the player fantasy we're trying to get. I think it loses focus on what we're trying to achieve. So the philosophy that we're approaching for the combat system when it comes to what it takes to kill guards is that it's incredibly easy to kill guards, but guards find it incredibly easy to kill you. Right now we have it so that it takes 3 hits to get a guard into the execution phase. Basically, a guard has a health bar and you hit the guard 3 times, or you have to be able to hit the guard 3 times. I'm using this as a
Spanish dude can't speak without using his hands.
I need a gesture. I'm holding 2 things. Enemy's health is low, but your health is 2. So enemies die with 3 hits and then it triggers like an execution that looks sick as fuck. But Silas also dies in 3 hits. The attempted difficulty curve for a combat system like this is for it to be relatively accessible when Silas is trying to kill 1 or 2 guards, and the second the guard number increases, the difficulty increases exponentially because guards will attack at the same time, they'll close in on you, it'll be like a suffocating feeling, and that's why we gave you the ability to quick throw a smoke bomb and get the fuck out, because you're probably not going to survive a battle against 6 guards by design. And this might put some people off. People like deep combat mechanics, people like combat games that take ages to finish, but it's not conducive to a good assassin game in my opinion. There are some examples where this is done well. One of my favorite combat systems ever is Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, where Ezio becomes like an absolute fucking machine and can mow down like 30 guards. But Outlaw's Vengeance, first of all, is not using paired animation, so it would be a little bit repetitive. Second of all, what I think Assassin's Creed Brotherhood doesn't do right is that it gives Ezio a lot of health by the end of the game. So at the beginning of the game, you have like 4 or 5 health squares, but you can keep upgrading your armor until you're basically invincible and you can deal a crazy amount of damage. What I spoke about earlier in the video is that Silas has to be a glass cannon, which means you can deal a lot of damage, but you break very easily. And I think that for me, that's just the perfect balance between lethality and fragility that an assassin should have.
The downside to this is that it will be hard to survive in combat, and the most productive thing to do is actually to escape. But the flip side to that is that you will have kind of like agency when you are dueling.
Yeah, for choosing the hitbox approach, you can decide your spacing between an enemy, and that can create a sense of safety. Then you can choose when to close in and go for the kill. I think that a hitbox combat, as we spoke about in point 2, does give you a lot of agency, and it also allows you to choose when to enter combat and when to escape it pretty seamlessly. We've made sure that in playtesting and improving this combat system, it feels pretty smooth to lock onto an enemy and then unlock and start running, and Silas will automatically sheath a sword. You can quick deploy a smoke bomb. A lot of things that kind of help the transition between combat and an escape feel natural, so that you can do it without feeling like you're being a pussy, basically, because you're not. Kind of. One thing that I think we need to improve on, and again, what you guys have been really kind of sweet with and amazing with over these last few videos, is sharing your honest thoughts and ideas. And some of you guys have really, really good ideas. So thanks for that. Combat, full honesty and transparency, is the aspect of a game that I'm least confident in, because I care, generally speaking, so little about it beyond its capacity to fuel the fantasy that I want.
Right.
One thing I'm convinced we need to improve on is feeling like the difficulty comes from your lack of skill and not from the game just telling you it's time to run. Because right now, when I playtest, I have a lot of fun with fighting 1 or 2 enemies, maybe even 3, and it's fun and it is engaging, and I do feel the difficulty curve rising from 1 to 3. But the second we get to 4 or 5, it doesn't feel like maybe one day I could be good enough to kill these guards. Right now, it feels like the game is punishing me for having been involved in this, and I don't want to be punished in a game, even in a stealth game. But I agree that feeling punished for being detected is not the way to make a stealth game. And that's kind of the problem we have with the combat system, is that it becomes so clunky and messy that it just feels like the game is breaking and killing you instantly just for getting in that situation, rather than saying, I am not skilled enough as an assassin to deal with the situation, let me find a solution for it.
Wow. And how do you think you can solve that?
This is an animation problem as well as a mechanic problem, but I think that improving the dodge animation and improving like how responsive it is will help a lot. Improving the parrying mechanics, tweak the enemy attack patterns so it doesn't feel like it's just 5 guards at the same time just slashing. Like even if they're attacking at the same time and they are piling attacks on, that it feels a bit more realistic. It feels more like Silas is trying to dodge between attacks. If you guys have a proposed solution, we're all ears. What do you think from seeing it?
I don't think I've seen enough of the combat system, because it's one of the latest things that were developed, I think. I've seen you run around. Clearly you don't favor combat, so I'm not going to casually see you trying it out too much.
No, I'll stealth kill a guard even if I'm playtesting combat. Those are the vibes. There is a video on screen now where we talk about the main villain in the story, which is Cato Meridian. So if you want to watch that video, feel free to watch it now. So what is the most controversial thing we're going to do in this video? No.